If you Google my name now, it comes up Scott Davies Gambling. And that's what breaks my heart, because for 11 years, I suppose, I lived my dream of playing football, and that's completely forgotten of.
I know I'm not going to gamble today, but my partner doesn't. You know, I might never get trust back. Do I want it back? I don't know. I might abuse that.
In my mind, she's, listen, the best mum I could ever ask for. But she definitely took the brunt of my gambling, turned her into a liar. She became devious.
I remember listening to my mum crying one night when she was on the bed. She was sitting on the bed in her bedroom. I remember her saying to my dad, I don't know where I've went wrong. Where did I go wrong?
I drove a wedge between their marriage just because my mum couldn't tell my dad the truth. And I look back now and think to myself, what on earth was I doing?
Welcome to the Gambling Harm podcast, a podcast from Epic Risk Management, in which we'll be looking at all aspects of gambling harm, including the work done by Epic across various sectors. I'm Steve Cotton, and I'll be joined on every episode by a different guest or guests from Epic's lived experience team. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Scott Davies and Alan Smart. On this episode, we'll be talking about how gambling harm doesn't just affect the gambler, but those closest to them. But before we get into that, Scott and Alan, can you each tell us the very short version, because I appreciate there are stories of different lengths that you do tell on a regular basis, but the very short version of your journey with gambling and how you ended up at Epic. Alan, can you start?
Yeah, no worries. Thanks. So I ended up at Epic through I had a sort of sales career with sort of big organisations in the UK, where I was supposed to be selling every day, but I was in the bookies, like gambling. My 9 to 5 was in the bookies, gambling. Went through all sorts of things. I remember trying to sell a company car to scrapyards. That's the kind of life that I led then. Just gambling manically, just a feeding frenzy, and my mind unravelling. A 21-year sort of career, pathologically gambling as well, trying to juggle that sort of sales career, very much sort of corporate led. But when you're in that sales environment, you have 3 things that can enable you to gamble. It's time, money, and opportunity. And I had all 3. I had access to all 3. I remember, doing things like putting the works laptop into cash converters, putting the works phone into cash converters, and customers trying to call me, and the phone sitting in cash converters, and I'm in the bookies, trying to win money to get it back out. And I remember going to get the laptop at the end of the month, and I'd already had like 50 million emails, like people looking for me. So yeah, that's kind of how my life was. Steve, like right up until the moment I joined Epic. I was in the corporate world, and Epic is an organisation I've been following for a little while across the socials, and a position came up, and I remember getting the phone call, and my now boss Dan saying, "I want you in my team," and right there and then I quit my corporate job on the spot. That just wasn't me anymore, and I've been at Epic, and ever since it's just like therapy every day. It's just doing something that's truly making a difference, and here I am.
Wow, that's the first time I've heard that. I mean, I'm more familiar with Scott's story, but it is incredible to hear that. And what a difference of careers, and what a different journey you're on now. What a different path.
Yeah, it's quite therapeutic, as I say. Sometimes it's not even like I don't know if I could class it as a job. It's just, fate, destiny, whatever, but it just fits my mental sort of state these days. So yeah, I love it.
And Scott, how about you?
Yeah, so I've been at Epic just over 5 years, I believe now. It came about that when I went to Sporting Chance for rehab in 2015, I became a public speaker for them. I went to an event in London, and Paul Buck came up to me after and just said, "Listen, I run a gambling harm company." And he said, "I want you to come and work for me." So at the time, I didn't really believe him. I thought to myself, "Oh, here we go. There's another bloke in a suit telling me that he's got this business." And long story short is that they obviously signed a project with the EFL to go around to the football clubs, being a professional footballer at the time, or just coming out of professional football, sorry. It made sense. I felt like I was at home going around to football clubs, telling my story about how gambling affected my life and my career. And yeah, like Alan alluded to there, it doesn't feel like work. And I mean that. I think when I go to when I go to work, I actually look forward to it because I'm still in an environment which I'm used to. I see a lot of old teammates and ex-managers whilst telling my story. And people go to Gamblers Anonymous. They have different routes of recovery. And I think my best medicine is telling my story in a place where I feel comfortable, and that's in schools, football clubs, because I really enjoy it. It's not about me, but it's about helping other people. The satisfaction that I do get from it is immense. That's the only way I can describe it. Not just from the person that's gambling, you get it from their friends and families. I've spoken to footballers' mums that have texted me this year and reached out to me on social media and said, "I've heard you've been helping my son, and he's on a new path now, and he's in a good place." And I never thought, I'll be honest with you, when I first started, I'd have as much passion or drive as I do for it. But yeah, it becomes compulsive in its own way that you're helping people and you're staying on the right path yourself. So yeah, massively grateful to people like Paul that brought me into the business. I'll be honest with you, without this job, I don't know what I would have been doing now. I was building beds when I came out of professional football on £10 an hour, travelling the length of the country to go and fit beds, and it was just a job. But now this is more than just a job, and yeah, absolutely love what I do.
We often think about the harm done to the gambler, don't we? But not perhaps the people that they affect. In terms of your stories, and I guess, I'll throw this sort of open to either of you to interject, but, when you look back on your time as a gambling addict, when you were active, who did you affect and who did you hurt, and how do you look back on that now? I mean, I appreciate that's a very open question that could go in all sorts of different directions, but, what would the headlines be when you reflect on that?
For myself, I definitely affected my family, and my friends as well. Also, sort of former work colleagues who just thought I was a big weirdo, just sitting isolated. I was the guy that was isolated, sitting in a corner. Don't come near me, don't talk to me. I don't want any sort of interaction. And they just thought, well, what is it with that guy? He's just never. Never takes part in it. He wouldn't sort of fit in with anything that was happening at work, anything my family wanted to do. I just sort of took myself away from it, and I isolated myself. And the opposite thing of isolation is connection, and I didn't have those connections. My family, more than any other set of people, knew there was a problem with gambling, but I don't think they knew just how sort of deep it was. And I remember listening to my mum crying one night when she was on the bed. She was sitting on the bed in her bedroom. I remember her saying to my dad, I don't know where I've went wrong. What is it? Where did I go wrong? And I still remember that. It's kind of tattooed on the inside of my mind. And I think about that, because it takes a little while for recovery. But see, for an affected other, it takes far, far longer. Because I know I'm not going to gamble today, but my partner doesn't. Just not the same sort of, and I might never get trust back. Do I want it back? I don't know. I might abuse that. I don't know. Even today, if I'm 5-10 minutes late, and this is me after 9 years in recovery, if I'm 5-10 minutes late, I'll get a text. Where are you? And there might be a traffic jam. The only problem with that is when I was gambling my brains out, I would lie and say, listen, I'm stuck in a traffic jam. And now when it really happens, I feel as though I've done something wrong. When I haven't, I'm telling the truth. But it's like, yeah, you still go through that kind of song and dance. But the way it affected my parents was, it was horrible. People that just love you and trying to do the best for you. My sister as well. Great relationship today, but for years just estranged, isolated, just a complete helplessness from them. They only wanted good things for me, but I was terrified of the weight of judgment. The weight of judgment would crush me. The stigma with gambling. I feel it would be more acceptable if I'd said I had a drink problem or a drug problem, but not gambling, because that's not really that bad. So yeah, that affected them badly.
Does that ring true with you, Scott? I think the parents factor, when Alan talks about that, I mean, I've sat in a room, I've been fortunate enough or privileged enough to sit in a room in your parents' house, listening to your mum and dad talking about it, and just your mum in particular, you could sense what you put your mum through. Listening to Alan there, does that sort of ring true with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, for the first few months, I carried on lying, and I didn't need to lie. And that's one of the weirdest things, that I got so used to lying that I lied about things that I didn't need to lie about anymore. But in terms of the trust, obviously, Alan mentioned it then. I've got my trust back, and I think that my parents trust me wholeheartedly now because I'm a completely different person. I'm sure Alan is as well. But there's things that we've got in place where my mum can see my transactions on my bank account still 8 years on, because it makes her feel at ease, and I've got no problem with that. I think for the first 2 or 3 years, I had to rebuild that trust, and it was difficult. And how do you do it? And how do you rebuild trust? It's really difficult. People say to me all the time, "How do you get that trust back?" But I think obviously over time you do build it in without even working on it. But yeah, I affected a hell of a lot of people. My mum and dad certainly, even bringing my sister, my brother-in-law, who were really close to me at the time, mates. Then I look at my teammates at football when I was betting on matches that I shouldn't have been betting on. The fans that were in the stands when I'm betting on my team to lose, and there's 4,500 people supporting the club, and I'm not trying a leg. So you think there's 4,500 people straight away that are being affected. But I didn't think about those people at the time. I just thought about myself and what I'm going to get out of it. And if I can win a few grand at 5 o'clock on a Saturday, I wasn't bothered if Pete and his kids that come to watch Crawley that day went home sad. And that's the selfish nature of gambling. So yeah, I could go on for hours about the people that I affected. And I think for all the money that I lost, that's my biggest issue that I have. The people that I affected and the way that I treated those people, disrespected them, lied to them, stole off them, cheated off them. And that's not the kind of person I've been brought up to be. Alan mentioned it again then about where did I go wrong? When his mum said about him as a person, and that rings true, so true, because my mum just said, like, I haven't brought you up to be like this, I've let you down, I've failed you. And my mum took the blame. She shouldered the blame for the person that I'd become, and it couldn't be any further from the truth. My parents, probably the best support network that I could have ever wished for during my time of gambling, and during my time of trying to stop, but I didn't want the help. So I wasn't ready to stop. And that's the one thing I will say, you can only stop when you're ready. Other people can't do it for you. And yeah, eventually I did realise that I had to do something about it, and I wish I'd have done it sooner now, but it is what it is. No regrets about the money or the career. It's just about the way I treat people.
Is it true that when you're in the moment, the people who would help you, the people who love you unconditionally, they're the ones you're pushing away the most almost? Is that the way it I mean, obviously you don't feel that at the time, but retrospectively, is that the case?
In a nutshell, yes. And the reason for that is because these are the people that's closest to you. When I talk about weight of judgment, weight of disappointment, Scotty said it, you weren't brought up like this, so why are you doing this? You've done this to the family, and these are all the things that goes through the compulsive gambler's head. You start to think, well, how can I disappoint my parents like that? What are they going to say? What are they going to think? What are their friends going to think down at the pub? Oh, that's your son, that's the compulsive gambler, that kind of thing. So it's really the overthinking that goes on in your head, when in actual fact, all they would ever have done is love me and help me. And I know that now. So, what Scotty sort of alluded to as well. Yeah.
I think, yeah, off the back of that, there's a line that my mum said to me one day. I think we were in the kitchen. I know we were at the house somewhere. I can't remember exactly, but she remembers it more than I do. And there was one day that I walked in to the house, and the words that came out of her mouth were, "I'm so ashamed of you." And she beats herself up still to this day that she was able to say that to me. And I'm like, why are you ashamed? Like, I can understand why you were ashamed of me at the time, because I wasn't a nice person. And I wasn't being the best version of me. I wasn't being a good son to them. They're allowed to be ashamed of me. I have no problem with that. Speaking to people closest to you sometimes is the hardest thing to do. There's a phrase that my mum used, a mother is only as happy as her unhappiest child. So every time that I thought, well, if I'm going through a problem and I tell my mum that I'm unhappy, or I'm down, I'm depressed, I'm upset, then all of a sudden she's going to be as down as I am. And then my dad's going to be down because they live in the same house. And it just brings the whole family down. So being a young lad at the time, moving into my 20s, I thought, I'm not going to speak about my problems to my mum. Why would I do that? Because it's not what young lads do, first and foremost. And second of all, I thought I was old enough, big enough, ugly enough. People probably disagree with me, but it's one of those where you think, I thought I could deal with all my issues myself. I thought anything that gets thrown my way, I'll get through this. And eventually, I think I was just exhausted of having to deal with those events that were going on, life's pressures, and I needed to speak to someone. And I used the word cracked. I cracked, and I thought, I've got to speak to someone. And my mum was the perfect person to speak to. And she ran the rehab centre for me, and little did I know that I'd be off to rehab for 26 nights a few weeks later. So, massively grateful for her to making that phone call.
You're years on now from your last bet, but do you still apologise to people? And if you do, how do they react?
Oh, that's a great question. I personally, for me, because all our recovery journeys are different, I don't do guilt. I don't do it because guilt can take me back out the door. And my family, my friends, they don't care for the old me. They don't care for it. They care for the new me. They want the new me. I've tried to make amends. I said sorry at the time, and I've remember saying to my dad I was sorry. Unfortunately, I lost my mum very suddenly, just before I came into recovery. So I never really got that chance to actually, when I hear Scotty talking about, and I've seen Scotty's video with his mum and dad, it just fills me with joy because he's able to do that. And anybody that's able to do that, I take my hat off to. I never quite get that chance. So that still hurts. If I do think about anything, it's kind of that. But for me, I just don't do guilt because it can take me back out the door, and I don't want that. My family, they love the new me, like the recovered me. If I think too much, I'll put it this way: if I look back too much, I can get depressed. If I look forward too much, I can get quite anxious. But I can deal with the next 12 hours in front of me, and that's where I live my life, day at a time.
For me, it's a weird one. So I don't apologise anymore. Because I don't want to be known as Scott, the recovering gamble addict. I leave that in the past. If you Google my name now, it comes up Scott Davies Gambling. And that's what breaks my heart, because for 11 years, I suppose, I lived my dream of playing football, and that's completely forgotten of. People see me now when I go into football clubs. In fact, I was stood in IB for a beach party a few years ago, and there was some lads that were at Fleetwood at the time, and as I walked past, they went, "There's that gambling guy." And that's completely forgotten about. I did play football as well. So, yeah, it's a funny one how time changes things. My mum said to me so many times, "Listen, you've said a sorry a million times, too many times, in fact." The hardest part for me is when people clap me on a stage at a school, or I'll do a talk at a football club or business, and they'll go, "That was brilliant. You've turned your life around. You should be so proud." I'm not. And genuinely mean that from the bottom of my heart. I'm not proud, because I wish I didn't have this story to tell. I wish I was a different person. I wish I'd lived my life differently, treated people differently. So when you get compliments for doing something like this job, it's a really weird feeling. I don't know how Alan feels on that part, but I don't want to liken it to someone else that's turned their life around for doing something completely drastic. You don't often get applauded for that. You obviously get tarnished with that brush, whereas because we go and tell our story, we get applauded. And it's really, really difficult, really, really tricky. I just kind of want to get in there, get my story done, tell the story, help anyone that's struggling, and get out. That's the kind of person I am, I guess, when it comes to that.
What do you think about that, Alan? That the idea of being applauded for something you wish you didn't have to have done.
Yeah. Just thinking about that now. Lived experience, as Paul Buck would say, and all of us, it's at the heart of everything we do. But see, when you think of it, we've all got lived experience. Ours was just about gambling. You have your lived experience, the stuff that you've been through. Everybody else has got their my friends have got their lived experience. But lived experience is the kind of buzzword just now. And it's, as Scotty said, when you're up there and you get, we've been in rooms, believe it or not, we work with gambling operators, and we educate them on how to sort of deal with people that may have gambling problems or detect harm. And we've told stories, and there's been tears in the room, there's been massive emotion. And for me, that's a good thing if you can impact at that level, because once you sort of elicit an emotion, it makes people think. But as far as Scotty goes, yeah, I kind of get a little bit embarrassed because it's just the path that I took. Like Scotty, I didn't set out to, to be getting applauded, to talking about trying to end my life and being in the bookies and all that kind of stuff. And it does kind of amaze me sometimes when people come up and they're like, "Oh, that was brilliant," and I was like, "Yeah, maybe for you, it wasn't for me." But I get it. The bigger picture is we're helping people at a deeper level, and just like Scott as well, I wish I didn't have my story to tell, but I have, and I'm doing good things with it today. That's what matters.
Yeah, no, I think that's a massive point. People say to me all the time, "I really enjoyed that," after the session, and it's the weirdest phrase because they say it and then they go, "Oh, I didn't mean it like that," but it's fine to mean it like that because it is, I suppose, an interesting story. It's different, but like Alan said there, everyone's got their own story. You could probably applaud most people that walk past you in the street each day. They've been through trials and tribulations in their life that no one hears about, but people hear about ours. And yeah, it's a strange one. It's a really strange one, and I don't think it'll ever change.
That's made me think of it in a completely different way, and I'm pretty sure that I'm guilty of probably saying that to you. So the first time I heard your story, but I think it's because it's impactful, and it is tricky to find the right words for it.
Yeah, there's no perfect way to describe it or to compliment someone on it. Listen, compliments are great, and it's nice hearing them from people because you know that they mean it. But at the same time, when I'm in a school and I'm shutting down my laptop, I'm shutting down my laptop at the time that people are applauding because I don't really know where to look. Don't want to stand there like with my arms outstretched, like saying, "Yeah, come on, applaud me," because yeah, it's just an awkward one. I think unless you've lived that life and you do what we do, it's probably a difficult thing to kind of understand or quite a lot or to fathom. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
Going back to, I guess, the central kind of crux of this episode, which is about how your gambling affected other people. And Scott, I'll come to you first on this. I mean, with regard to your parents, your mum talked about how it actually made her physically ill at times. It wasn't just the mental worry as well. I mean, this must be going on with so many families across the country and the world now who and they don't really know, do they? Or people looking in would think they wouldn't have a clue what people like that were going through with your mum up late worrying, and then it manifests itself in a physical illness as well.
Yeah, my mum's in my mind, she's the best mum I could ever ask for. But she definitely took the brunt of my gambling, turned her into a liar. She became devious. I started to manipulate the situation when it came to finance between her and my dad, where she took out so much money out of their bank account to pay my debts. I don't know if you remember back to the day that we were filming at the house, and she said that she paid off £17,000 car loan, and I don't even remember that. I genuinely do not remember it. So I was living this sort of like blurred life. But yeah, it causes massive disruption within the family. It obviously, headaches were one thing that she had all the time, bloating. She had like stomach acids and things like that, but it was making her ill. But the biggest thing for me that I drove a wedge between their marriage is because my mum couldn't tell my dad the truth. And I look back now and think to myself, what on earth was I doing? And my mum probably looks back as well and says, what was she doing? But she wanted to protect me. I'm her son. And in her mind, I'm a sort of like blue-eyed boy, do you know what I mean, that can't do anything wrong. So yeah, it's a really difficult situation. But like you say, going back to the families around the country, there'll be millions that are affected. It's not just the families initially, it's the wider family, the wider impact. I know that my mum used to speak to my auntie about my gambling. She used to lean on her friends about it. So then I'm sure that they then took the brunt of my mum's problems because she couldn't speak to my dad. So it's just a knock-on effect, a domino effect. And it's looking back now, it's such a selfish addiction. And I think that's the thing that at the time as a gambler, you don't realise and you don't really care about. And that's mad to say that I didn't care about my mum's feelings and how she felt at the time because she's the person that I would do anything for. Looking back now, was that true? Maybe not. And that's the way I kind of have to look at it, I guess.
But Alan, I guess you're so deep rooted in it and you're so immersed by it, aren't you, that you don't think about other people necessarily in that moment.
You don't, Steve. This illness cuts you off from everything, and that's the thing. This illness was always here for me. Whether I was happy, I would gamble. Whether I was sad, I would gamble. Just any normal day, I would gamble. And I remember standing in a high street bookmakers, and my phone was kicking off like 6-7 times. And I eventually went out to answer it, and it turned out that my mother had a seizure, and nobody knew what it was at the time, but it turned out to be a brain tumour. And, I talk about guilt, and there it comes crashing right into my guts. So, and I always wonder, what part did the worry play in that? Do you know what I mean? It turned out it was benign, which we were all sort of really glad about. But you do, in your quieter moments, when you're sitting and, the clarity came when I had no money. People talk about willpower. See, when I had no money, my willpower was amazing. It was incredible. I'm never going to do this again. And then you get money and that just evaporates. You just go and you're kind of led into a bit of a trance, and you're there. I remember being in the bookies, my feet were nailed to the floor. Just having money, getting paid, and being absolutely starving. There's a Greggs across the road. I can't even make the journey across the road for a sausage roll because I spent all my money. So that kind of worry, and my mother knew about that. When I lived alone, I'd go down. She'd have a bag of groceries. She'd been to Asda and say, "Here, take that up the road with you. Take that," because she cared about me. There was bread, there was milk in it and stuff like that, and I was really thankful for it. But the worry, I've got kids now, and they know about my journey, and it's, the biggest thing you can be for your kids is there. Just be there for them. That's it. Don't try to fix it. Just be there and be somebody that they can talk to on the level. And that's what I try and do today.
It's quite interesting, Steve, like that Alan said that. So my mum says to me all the time now, she was like, "Scott, you were ill." And I don't accept it, because I said to my mum, I said, "I don't see it as an illness." I said, because I think every single person that I've ever come across in recovery calls it an illness. And I'm probably the one that has an opinion on it, is that by the choices that you make, you're no longer ill. I don't deem myself to be ill anymore, and I'm sure Alan isn't either. People do have illnesses they can't shake off and can't get rid of. And I think with gambling, when my mum says to me, "You're ill," I'm like, "Mum, I wasn't ill." I said, because I've got a choice and I can get out the other side of this. Some people don't have that choice. So when she's trying to take the pressure off me for the things that I did, I put it straight back on her, and I'm like, no, I made those choices. So it's an interesting topic, an interesting conversation. I've had it with a lot of people in recovery when I went to Gamblers Anonymous, and they're like, "No, it is an illness, no, it is." And I'm like, "No, it's not." And I'm probably the only person I've ever met in recovery that says that. But I don't know your thoughts on that, Alan.
Yeah, I see it as a mental illness, because I can tell you how mental it made me.
Of course, yeah.
And I remember my partner. She used to work somewhere. It was a contact centre. And she used to have to take £1 every day for a locker. And I remember I was dipping her purse and taking the money out day after day after day. And she would say to me, "Have you been in my purse, Alan?" I was like, "No." And it was 4 or 5 days of this. And I turned round. This is how sick I was at the time. I turned around and I said to her, "There's something wrong with you. You need to go and see a doctor. You're saying that there's been money in your purse and it's went missing." The level of, that is just being mentally sick. I'm not mentally sick now. I'm recovered. I'm in recovery every day. I don't think I'm mentally ill. I don't think I've got an out-and-out illness today. I tend to look on the sort of, I'm a glass half full type of guy. I'm an optimist. So I totally get what Scotty's saying. And yeah, he's probably in the minority in that. There are people, and there are some people in Gamblers Anonymous that don't think it's an illness as well, believe it or not. But yeah, I don't think too much about it these days, to be honest. I just got on in my life. Yeah, but yeah, it's an interesting topic.
And not only that, just another one. But I don't see myself as a recovering gambler anymore. I just see myself as someone that did gamble. Like, I don't feel like I'm in recovery every day. I don't want to be labelled that tag. That's one thing that I think, remember when I spoke to my mum and dad, that's what my dad broke down about when I said that people know me as Scott, the gambling addict, the one that had a problem with gambling. And after, I said to him, I said, like, "What made you break down?" And he said, "That was the point." He said, "When you said all the things you've done in football being completely forgotten of, people know you as gambler." And I said, "I don't want to be like that. I don't want to meet people in my life and go, 'I'm Scott, the recovering gambling addict.'" Like, because it's something I did nearly 8 years ago now. So are my mates that put a fiver bet on a week more of a problem gambler than me? At the moment, they are. So I don't want to carry that tag around with me. I leave that in the past, completely in the past. I don't do the Gamblers Anonymous stuff now where people say, oh, that's a dangerous place to be. I still watch horse racing most days. I still watch football every single day. And I used to bet on every football match that I used to watch. So I'm not in a more dangerous situation because I'm still doing things that I used to do, but I'm now doing it without betting. And I know that will be very sort of controversial with a lot of people, but I suppose everyone's different.
So on the face of it, that sounds a little bit like walking a tightrope, but it takes me back to something your dad said, or you said about your dad. And this is the next point I was going to get onto, which is almost the legacy of your addiction and how the people who you affected. And we touched upon this earlier on, Alan, but you know, you hurt a lot of people and they were worried about you. Your dad, you said quite often, your dad might be watching the horse racing and he scrambles for the remote control because he almost thinks he has to turn it off in your presence. And is there a legacy? I'll come to you, Scott, first, but is there a legacy of that, with both of you almost, how people still lapse back into thinking that the old you might pop up at some point?
Yeah, like being in a football changing room, you can imagine what it's like. So it's absolute carnage where people on a Saturday have got their horse racing bets. We're on the coach the other day and they're saying, are we getting a sweepstake for the Grand National? And they're like, oh, sorry, Scotty. I'm like, what are you apologising for? What are you apologising for? Because you cannot protect me in everything that I do. I protect myself in what I do, and that's the only thing that matters. Like, I'm the only person that's going to walk myself into a bookmaker's or walk into a casino, download a betting app on my phone. I'm nowhere near doing that. So I said, listen, lads, you don't need to worry about it. Just speak about it normally, because I'm further away from having a bet than some of you guys. And that's proved true because they have a bet within the next 30 seconds when they got their phone out. So I honestly believe, and maybe it's a place of, people say it's maybe a bit of complacency, saying, oh, it's not a good way to see it or view things. But I'm further away from having a bet than all my mates, or becoming a problem gambler again before my mates are. And I genuinely believe that, because I loved how it made me feel at the time when I did it. But I've got too much to lose now. I don't want to lose my parents. I wouldn't want to lose my family. I wouldn't want to lose my wife. So yeah, there's just too much to lose now. Whereas back then, I was a young boy that had money and I didn't have anything to lose in my mind because I had the world at my feet, in my head. My parents were never, ever going to leave me or, disown me, for example, until the day that they said they would, which they threatened me with. And that really woke me up. And I thought, right, I can't do this anymore. And yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah, interesting. I'm just having a chuckle there at Scotty. I respect everything he says, but, I watch football these days, but for the life of me, and I respect the physical condition jockeys get themselves into and stuff, unless I was betting on it, there's no way I'd watch that sport. It's just boring to me now. I watch it and it's like these little men on these I don't get it. I just like, it's just no sport. I'd rather watch fencing before I watch horse racing. But he's right in what he says, and everybody's recovery journey is different, and I respect everybody's journey. And Scott's right in what he says, but the legacy I think about, I've got to watch myself at times. I don't go into like pub quizzes, nothing like that at all. I don't do fantasy football league, anything like that. I don't toss a coin. I remember going to but you've got to watch that because you can take it to extremes. I remember going to a school fete with my daughter once, and she's like, Dad, can you do this for me? I can't do it. And it was hook a duck for a prize. And I'm like, I'm standing, I'm considering, I'm like, what are you doing, man? You plank. Just hook the flipping duck. Do you know what I mean? But it's like you get so far down this road of recovery, and I'm into the whole 12 steps and all that type of thing. But you can take it to extremes, and that example is an extreme where you just think, well, wait a minute, hang on, you can hook a duck. You're not going to go and run to a bookmaker's and do your brains in because of that. But I do, legacy now, it's important to me. My whole family knows what gambling did to me and my friends, and through the power of example and how I don't tell people what to do. I don't say, gambling's, if they want to gamble when they're older, that's up to them. My missus still does a lottery. Doesn't tell me if she wins. I don't know, maybe some black bags at the door one day and I'll know that she's won. I don't know, but I don't tell people what to do. I don't pontificate. I'm just me, and hopefully by the power of example, somebody can say, well, I wouldn't mind a bit of that or a piece of that, but I don't want to go down the road that Alan went down. So I might quit when I'm up or whatever. I don't know, but yeah, it's a good question.
So look, we're coming to the end, guys. Obviously, thanks so much for your time. I mean, I think this is really enlightening. This is the sort of the conversations that I'm glad we're able to have. But also, from what you said earlier, I wish we weren't having. It's such a hypothetical situation, isn't it? Really, but you both seem now in in a much happier place. And in terms of the people who you hurt and the people you affected, those relationships by and large seem to have been repaired. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, I've got a life beyond my wildest dreams these days. I get up every day, I pinch myself and I think, how am I not doing something that I did for 21 years every single day? And I'm really lucky. I'm a one day at a time guy. I can deal with the next 12 hours in front of me, and that's how I live my life. I'll wake up tomorrow and I'll deal with that 12 hours as well. And that's just, I can live it in those sort of bite-sized chunks instead of thinking like, probably different for Scotty. If you were to ask me, are you going to gamble in a year's time, Alan? I don't know. I cannot tell you that I won't. And, if I was to tell my dad that, or my sister, they'd probably be like, oh, that might shake them and stuff, like what Scotty was saying. But I don't look that far ahead. I just deal with what's immediately in front of me, and I'm really, really happy.
You say life beyond wildest dreams. If you move to England,
Ooh, that's another podcast, Scotty.
Yeah, for me, I'm so content. I love my football more than I've ever loved it. Now managing as well, it's become quite compulsive, I'll be honest with you, but it's a good compulsion. It earns me a wage. It keeps me mentally sane, I guess I want to say. But the rush, the buzz that I miss from gambling, I get it in other areas now, and football is certainly one of them. Winning and losing, it's like a drug. Gambling is like a drug. But more importantly than that, I think I've got my parents back on side. We're in a really good place. Obviously got married a couple of years ago now. Met my wife when I came out of rehab. She doesn't know about any of my past, which is really weird. I say doesn't know. She knows about it, but she's never seen me gamble. So that's what I mean by that. And yeah, I live a new life now. I want to leave the past in the past. Don't want to, sounds weird yet again because we talk about it every day at work, but I don't want to keep bringing up the past. I don't want to talk about it to my close friends and family. Telling my story in front of my parents a few months ago at Wembley was one of the hardest things because there was truths that came out that day that they'd never heard of, never heard about. And yeah, I don't know. It's every now and again, it's good to dip in and realise where you were and where you've now got to. And it's always important to important to respect where you were at. And I certainly do that. But yeah, for me, it's like you say, telling my story is what motivates me every single day to be the best version of me and to keep me on the straight and narrow and on the safe path.
Brilliant. Well, Scott, Alan, thanks so much for joining us. That's all from this episode of the Gambling Harm podcast. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Thanks for listening.